This is Dune Talk, a DuneNewsNet.com production. Join us now for the latest Dune news, reactions, and lively discussions.
Hey everyone, new week, new episode of Dune Talk. This is the official show of DuneNewsNet.com where we cover all things Dune. Movies, books, comics, games, collectibles, and more. We're now less than 5.5 months away from the release of Dune Part 2, and there's just so much great stuff on the horizon for Dune fans. This is Marcus Gabriel, your editor at DuneNewsNet.com, and I'm looking forward to tackling some interesting movie-related questions on today's show.
Johnny Sobchuk here again, excited to continue the discussion with the trailer. It's hard to believe that it's, almost 2 weeks ago since it came out at this point. Yeah, time's flying, and there's still plenty to talk about and to analyze, and appreciate the support on the most recent videos, plenty of good questions and feedback on that, so thank you.
Simon Dowdy here. Marcus, you made my day with saying 5.5 months, not even 6 months now. So we're getting closer and closer as we go. And thanks for everyone that's been watching, listening, and we got some interesting questions and comments that we'll answer today, hopefully.
Now it's time for some movie news.
Dune Movie News.
First of all, and this is more like a public service announcement, with the Dune Part 2 poster and trailer releasing, there have been a lot more confirmations regarding the movie's international release dates. So as we know, the movie's domestic release date is Friday, November 3rd. And fortunately, this time around, it will be released in a majority of countries around the same time. Just like thinking back to Dune Part 1 and like everything that went on there, thankfully, that's over now. So having said that, in parts of Europe, Southeast Asia, and South America, Dune Part 2 will arrive in theaters either 1 or 2 days earlier. So it's not a big difference, but it's just the typical thing that has to do with like how some countries organize their premiere dates. We do have an article on the website with all confirmed dates so far, and we'll keep adding further information as that becomes available. Yeah, and then next story, we had Javier Bardem was actually speaking to Variety. It was the world premiere of The Little Mermaid in Los Angeles. And he took that opportunity to basically give high praise to his co-star, Austin Butler, regarding his performance in Dune Part 2. So what he said, quoting from Javier Bardem, "Seeing him bald or seeing him with hair, he's an amazing creature to look at. You can look at him for hours and go, oh my God, how beautiful you are." So it really sounds like Elvis fans don't have to worry that the hairless look will diminish his handsomeness. Bardem went on top of that, he's so nice. He's so generous, so funny, and so committed. He's done an amazing job. I've only had a couple of moments with him, but I would see him and it was like, wow, he is the character. So we've previously discussed on a show how Austin Butler has demonstrated great range in his performances and how he may leverage that in portraying Feyd as a more complex character with having more than one side to him. Johnny, what do you make of these brief comments from Javier Bardem?
Well, it definitely sounds like he's as enamored with Austin Butler as a lot of people have been over the last year or so. So that's, I guess, maybe no surprise, but certainly high praise from someone as talented and handsome in his own right, I would say, as Javier Bardem. But it's cool to just hear that, Austin Butler, who seems pretty affable and talented and everything. It seems like Javier Bardem just really meshed well with him, and wouldn't expect them to have a ton of interaction on set or, in scenes and whatnot. But pretty cool to hear that all the interactions, it sounds like, from all the different actors from Part 1 and what we've heard so far in interviews for Part 2 just seems very like tight-knit and just very positive and everything, regardless of like who's playing who and how much they're in the movie and things like that. Just always nice to hear those little tidbits here and there and stories from the set and production.
First of all, I was like, Javier Bardem's in The Little Mermaid. I'm like, okay, I guess so. But like Johnny was saying, all around, I think everyone had a fun time making it, and it seemed like everyone got along, and that's so important when you're making a film, because that whole entire time, that's your family for, that 4 to 6 months that you're on set. So, and it makes me think that maybe the only scene that we have with both of them is at the very end.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I think that's that's what he's referring to. A couple of moments that's the only time when Feyd would have interaction with the Fremen or other people on Arrakis. The recent release of Dune Part 2 official trailer has ignited some enthusiastic discussions across the Dune and movie fandom communities. If you haven't already, check out our last two Dune Talk shows, where first we did the overall reactions after the trailer just came out, and then last week we went to a more in-depth breakdown where we did included some spoilers. But like looking at comments and some of the online Discord, there are several topics that keep coming up often. So we thought we'd go ahead and return to those. So starting with the Giedi Prime arena scene in the trailer, why is it really black and white? So it's surprising how often that comes up. It seems to be like a really, really popular topic. And there is such a wide range of theories. So we discussed some of them last week. So it really ranges from there being a lore-related explanation, like related to the lighting on Giedi Prime, the sun or something in the arena, to it being more like a stylistic choice. So is it like some sort of vision, or is it the way that the scene is being context in the movie? So yeah, let's go ahead and do a round table. So the question is it more of a scientific explanation, or is it a stylistic choice? And why do you think so? Johnny, do you want to go?
Yeah, so definitely been thinking about this. As you mentioned, a lot of people have been commenting or speculating on it. And I like all the theories. There's a lot of good theories out there and kind of ways to analyze it or interpret it. A couple of things I did want to do just real quick, and this will give everyone here and watching something to munch on as far as thinking of Villeneuve's thought process on this. I pulled up, the first thing was a kind of trailer deep dive that he did back in 2020 when the first trailer came out in September, I think, of 2020, when we thought it was still coming out in around the holidays. And he spoke with Entertainment Weekly, and he was talking about the Harkonnens, and he said that, quote, Giedi Prime, the Harkonnen planet, is one where the sun is obscured most of the time by heavy clouds of pollution. It's an artificial world. It's a world made out of plastic and cut off from nature. Their skin is not used to sun, so they have to protect themselves from sunlight when they go to Arrakis. So I think it's interesting to hear him talk about the environment and kind of the logic behind it. And then he also spoke about the Harkonnens and Giedi Prime to the LA Times around the time that the movie came out in 2021. And he said that Giedi Prime is a highly advanced but colorless world devoid of any semblance of vegetation or natural light, to the point that its inhabitants have evolved to become ghostly pale and hairless. And he said, quote, I came in with the idea that they will probably be the most evolved beings in the world, the richest, most sophisticated, and that their technology will be disconnected from nature. I'm in love with the color black, and I've been dreaming for decades about creating a world made out of one color with a lot of sensuality and high design. So again, that doesn't really answer anything, but it's just interesting to think about the gears turning in his head and what those things might mean. I'm not convinced necessarily, but I'm still kind of leaning towards that this is just the aesthetic of the world for whatever reason. I don't think it's anything that's necessarily being chosen as like to highlight the fact that it's a flashback or a dream sequence or a vision, something like that. I do think it is just the way it looks. Now, the way it looks, whether that is the natural lighting of the planet because of the atmosphere or its star, however they're getting that natural light, or if it is something more like I've seen people point out, almost like it's like infrared or something like that. And I could see that the comments he made about there being devoid of natural light, which is why their skin is so pale. There could be something to that. Maybe it's the way the arena is lit with artificial light, something like that. It's hard to say, but I think that there are some really interesting ideas out there. I just don't think that it's necessarily like a flashback or to highlight something maybe that dramatic. But if nothing else, I do think it is cool if it wasn't something so scientific or like world based. It would be an interesting, kind of more expressionistic take on showing the Harkonnens, and you could definitely pull some thematic meaning from the way it's colored and the way they appear in the few shots that we got. So Yeah, I'm very curious to see, what you two think about it, especially since we have been thinking about it for a while now.
Well, as someone that's live from Giedi Prime, I don't know what you guys are talking about. The colors are just fine here. Um, no, but I really do think it. Now that you brought up those comments, it's interesting. Even back then, that he was talking about the lack of color on Giedi Prime, and there's something I saw today. I think it was on Secrets of Dune's YouTube channel, where he was talking about how if the arena scene is super violent, how he can get away without showing too much blood also. So it could be a flashback and showing a lot of blood, because you can only show X amount of blood before you get, you become a PG-13 rating to an R rating. Tarantino did it in one of the Kill Bill volumes also. So it could be that. I'm still gonna go. It's either Paul's visions, because all he knows is the Harkonnens are, they're beasts, they're ruthless and all that, and maybe that's what Paul pictures Giedi Prime to be like, or it could be a flashback of Padu's character going and explaining to the Emperor, like, "Hey, this is what I saw when I went there." So it's interesting. I like it. The more I think about it, the more it grows on me. And Johnny brought up a really interesting point last week, by the way, in the arena scene. When I was editing the show and I was looking for slides, those weird creatures in the background are super, like, nightmarish, like
Yeah,
creepy. Like, I didn't realize them
absolutely.
until I was like looking for those slides,
From head to
and
toe.
I'm like, those are like disturbing. But also the whole entire thing about the gas planet, if you even look at the David Lynch movie, it is very much a gas planet. So time will tell. But I
One
don't know what you're
thing
talking about. It's pretty sunny today.
One thing, I'm glad that you agree with me, Simon, about the creepiness and the disturbing nature of those figures in the background. I did go back and read part of the gladiator scene, after, I think it was after our most recent episode, and I did notice it does mention, I think they described it as handlers for Feyd. And so I guess people in the arena, I think I mentioned this or interpreted it as this in our last episode as well, but just, how in Gladiator, like the movie or Gladiator sequences, there's people in the arena like getting weapons and like handing out weapons and stuff like that. I would imagine in the way it's depicted in the book, they basically help Feyd with the kill and they hand him different materials and kind of guide the spectacle of it. So I think that's who those are. But the costuming and the design is very, very interesting. And I'll be curious to see if we get any detailed, like close up looks at those figures, or if it's again more an expressionist, just like kind of a specter in the background, which is almost more Lynchian in the way that they kind of appear as in the trailer, at least. But so I'm thinking that it's something environmental. Simon seems to think it's maybe more vision or dream related. Marcus, you gotta give us a breakup here. What's the verdict?
Yeah, no, I'm certainly leaning far in the scientific direction. So I could see like some reasons for there to be like a stylistic choice, but I don't think that's. I mean, it would be a bold stylistic choice, but it is like what some people said. It can be like really jarring if it's just like in there just to fit in with the themes, or just to that you're talking about a flashback or vision. It seems like it wouldn't fit. And like none of the previous visions were in black and white, right? So like there's no precedence for that being a vision. But yeah, like going back to the comments of Villeneuve, and like having this whole idea that these are three very distinctive worlds, like that we have. We had Caladan like in the last film, and then now we have Giedi Prime, we have Arrakis and Kaitain. Like why would like all the worlds have the same like lighting and same scientific effects? Like you're in a universe of 1 million worlds, so obviously there would be differences in the way that the stars work, and the way that the distance from the suns, like how the light reflects. And we know that Giedi Prime is a heavily industrialized world. So there may even be made like a combination of like environmental factors and like a man-made situation where they've, exploited the world so much that it's, become a hazardous place to live in, and the combination of those factors. So I'm definitely leaning towards the scientific explanation. And I could see them maybe like combining things, like, okay, there's a scientific explanation, and then like that allows them to get away with more in that scene. But I don't see it like being like a sole decision, like, okay, like I think it would work really well stylistically just to do black and white for this one scene. So that's my thoughts so far. And I wonder if we are going to get some answers like in subsequent trailers or interviews, or if it's going to like wait until the film itself comes out.
Johnny brought up an interesting point when he was talking about the comics and how the Harkonnens have a really hard time with sunlight. If you look at most of the Harkonnens that we see on Arrakis, especially like those that we were talking about that Paul probably fighting that we see in the first film with like the space, suit looking, is that why they're wearing them also, to protect themselves from the sunlight? That's something to think about, part of the design.
Yeah, that's a good point, Simon. And also, another comment that doesn't explain or really go into a lot of detail as far as this question of Giedi Prime is concerned, but Jacqueline West, I believe it was in March, there were some comments that she made about the movie and part 2 and how what their goals were and kind of what their thought process was. And she did mention specifically that all the worlds are getting expanded, and that it was, she said, quote, it was about creating 3 separate, different looking worlds. And so, I think that, especially if we're talking about just, the visuals and like even the color palette and things like that. I mean, with Arrakis, of course, it's very warm. It's oranges and browns and reds, yellows. And then with, I'm imagining Kaitain with the Emperor and House Carino, it's going to be maybe more reminiscent of Caladan, but more like tropical potentially. We know that they filmed in Italy, and I'm expecting a lot of greenery and water, and probably, I'm sure, a lot of CG and expanded environments, things like that. And then, of course, kind of, so 2 polar opposites, and then in the middle you would have like just the black and the white, almost in gray, of Giedi Prime, especially the interiors. And that's another thing too, is and people have kind of mentioned this here and there, there's not really a line of thought to it, but people have said, well, Giedi Prime and the scenes with Margot Fenring and Feyd, like indoors, and the Baron, like we see that it's not in color, or it is in color, excuse me. Their skin tones and their costumes and whatnot. And so kind of people thinking, well, maybe the gladiator scene is a flashback or a vision or something. But again, the gladiator scene is outdoors, whereas these other scenes are inside. So they're not going to have to deal with lighting or the sun or the star, whatever it is, the same as an interior scene would be. So again, that's another thing where I kind of agree with Marcus in that I don't think it does make stylistic sense if it is that, because it's just so different from all the visions and things we saw in part 1. But then also, again, it would be, as you said, it would make sense stylistically, is kind of this way of interpreting the story and the themes. But Villeneuve has proven that he is very scientific minded, and he's all about, when it comes to his world building, about the logic and kind of the cause and effect of these things, and appearance and the environment and character design and whatnot. So I think that it does make a little bit more sense. I have no idea what the actual answer is, so I am really curious. I'm already looking forward to the Giedi Prime section of the art and making of book that we're going to get, because I'm sure that'll have some really interesting details in their thought process of everything. But and also, the more we talk about character design and those creepy looking figures in the arena, I think we're all forgetting, because we talked about, well, Christopher Walken isn't in the trailer, etc. Still cross my fingers that we're going to get a navigator in part 2 in one scene or form or fashion. I think that just the weirder stuff that we've seen already, I'm thinking that it is certainly possible that we get something, at least an illusion or a glimpse at a gladiator, a navigator. And especially knowing that there's if there is a Dune Messiah adaptation, that there would be more significant presence. Probably don't want to throw that on people if we do get to that movie. Just, oh, here's a navigator, but yeah, I just think if nothing else, I love the black and white aesthetic because it is weird. It is so different, and those figures in the background is so different from really anything we saw in part one. It is an extension of the Giedi Prime aesthetic, but I just love that there's so many different stylistic choices that they seem to be going for, including, I mean, my background, for example, still don't know. There's speculation. We did a bunch of talking about that last week, but
I think we might get a glimpse of a space navigator in the next trailer, but I kind of want them to show him, and I kind of don't. I want the first time we do have one, and we should have one at the final battle scene. Kind of like, whoa, that's what they look like. Okay, cool. Like, throw us off guard totally, and being like, this is kind of awesome. You know, I mean, if David Lynch had one, the need has to have him.
Yeah, especially with the presence of the Carinos and like the Emperor, I think it would make sense. And also, I know we're jutting off into this navigator topic, so I'll wrap it up. But I think it would be cool. I hope that they don't show it in the marketing because there's not a reason to. I think that'd be a really cool thing just to save for the movie. But it would be nice if at some point someone confirmed or Villeneuve said, "Oh yeah, there's going to be," or hinted at least that there would be. And we know, that they got pretty far along. That I can't remember the name of the artist, but the designer, they did come up with a design. I think it's the same guy that worked with Villeneuve on Arrival for the heptapods. I believe worked to come up with some navigator designs. So I'm sure they very easily could have extrapolated from that and come up with something pretty easily for part two.
Thinking back to some of I think it was in a couple of interviews where Villeneuve was talking about how when he was working on his one of his earlier films, Incendies, and like he was out in the desert, and he was already thinking about like how he would film Dune Part 2, and like that Paul would be sitting on that rock and things like that. Like I have to imagine that he's thinking the same way about Dune Messiah. That even though the film might be 4 or 5 years away, who knows at this point, but that's his ambition. That he's already said it several times, and he's already thinking ahead. Like, how can I make that connection to this film? Hey, so speaking about something that wasn't in the trailer, so one of the big burning questions, I think, for speaking for all Dune fans is how is Alia going to appear in this Dune Part 2 movie? So remember, we actually did see Alia in Dune Part 1, like that was in a vision though, like with when Paul knew that she was pregnant, and he saw the vision with her, like after having taken water of life, holding a baby Alia in her arms. So I guess starting with you, Simon, I know that you've been a fan of the '84 movie, and you've also seen a mini series. Like taking into account like those past adaptations, like what would you like to see in terms of convincing Alia in this new movie?
So I keep going back and forth. I'm like, do we have a time jump 2 years down the line where you can get an actress that maybe 4 years old that can play a 2-year-old, or do we have little creepy Alia? And I mean, not like the Ally McBeal CG doll back in the day, but I'm torn. I want her to be in it, and also if we don't have her in it, then what's the point of the whole vision showing Jessica pregnant and being like, hey, I'm going to have a sister? Plus, she's so crucial for the later stories like Messiah, Children of Dune. It's tricky. Like, how can you cast someone to play such a character that's so young? As much as I hate AI and how I think it's taking over the world and how it's pretty much Skynet, I'm sure there's some software out there that can create a real lifelike child, because she's little. She's like, what, 2 or 3, I think, by the end of the first book. So it's interesting, and I don't know how they can do it without making it look really cheesy and people being like, what, that's a baby, come on, give me a break. Like, throw you off, like totally, like you're totally invested in the movie. You're like, okay, this jihad's happening, and wait, that that looks ridiculous. Come on, that's like the new Jar Jar Binks. Like, I don't want that. I want the need to create something, and I believe that they're capable of to surprise us. Kind of like when we saw Gollum for the first time in the Lord of the Rings movie. Like, I totally bought Andy Serkis as Gollum, like the mocap, and that those movies are over 20 years old. So I don't know. Maybe we should get Andy Serkis to mocap Alia, but it's so tricky. She has to be in it, and I don't want her to be like all of a sudden be like 10 years old or 5 years old. I want her still to be that little creepy child. You know, like one of my favorite lines in the '84 movie is when she's looking at the Baron and being like, "My brother is the Kwisatz Haderach." You know, she has to give you that uncomfortable vibe because when you read her, she is that uncomfortable character. I mean, Jessica feels uncomfortable with her own daughter, even Paul with his own sister. So, you know, I don't know if you guys have seen the movie. I think it was called Meg. It was earlier this year. It was like a kind of like futuristic horror movie with like a doll that takes over. And like if they do it kind of like that with that actress, she can easily play a 4-year-old. I just she can't be older than 4 or 5. That's my that's my thing.
Son, you bring up a good point because like the character is super unnatural, right? Like, and that's mentioned in the book. She is pre-born. Like before she came out of the womb, she had, you know, access to memories of all her ancestors, and she knew what her mother did. So it is a really unnatural character. So it is tricky. And I guess Johnny, what I was gonna like ask before you answer specifically about your thoughts on Alia in general, like or Alia specifically, like looking at like film technology in general and other recent films or things that you've seen, like what options do you think there are, like in general?
Yeah, good question, Marcus. And to Simon's point, so I'll say two things just real quick to answer that. One thing I would say, and this is not an inside scoop or an exclusive, or I don't know anything, but Alia's in this movie. There's no way she's not. Alia, I don't think that Alia would be hinted at and so explicitly depicted in part one if they weren't going to follow that plot thread. Alia is just, yeah, too significant not to have in it. And so I think we can kind of put that to rest. The question though is, how do you do it? And also I think I'm sure we will hear and see a little bit related to the character in the marketing and whatnot, but I don't really anticipate that they're going to fixate and put a lot of attention on the character because it's not, obviously it's not going to be like a big name actor or something. It's not something that there's that particular plot point isn't going to draw people in to watch the movie. I think it's just going to be a very interesting sub kind of plot that goes under, of course, the main story. But and then to your other question though, Marcus, I think the main thing I would say first is that knowing Villeneuve and knowing Greg Fraser and knowing Paul Lambert and Gerf Nevzer and all the people that work in the effects and everything on Dune and just all of his movies in general, they explored every possible option before deciding what they were going to do. I'm certain of that because you do have just the route of going with a child and having that child act and not doing anything strange, not doing anything to augment the performance, just good old-fashioned acting. And you know, we've seen plenty of times throughout film history, and certainly, you know, recently, that if you get the right child actor and you give them the proper direction, they can do some really impressive and scary things. Especially, I think children in horror films are especially notable, and especially on the younger side. So I think that would be kind of probably thought process one for Villeneuve, especially because I think when it comes to performance and character, he doesn't like to completely sublimate someone in visual effects or like overly done makeup or costume, whatever it might be, especially just getting to know a character. Like he wants that. And that's what was one of the concerns with the Baron is how do you bring that character to life? And they very seriously considered initially doing a fully 100% computer generated character, like a Snoke or a Gollum, like Simon said. I'm so glad that that did not happen. I think we would have been getting like Goblin King vibes from like Hobbit movies or something. And so just the subtlety is what Villeneuve always looks for. So I think I'm leaning towards something that is just an actor performing, but there are those options like you've both pointed out where with effects you could, whether it's altering the voice on a sound level or altering the appearance in the face or the body of an actor to make them seem maybe younger than they actually are, or in the voice at least, maybe making them seem older than they are to some degree. There's definitely a lot of tricks they can play with in that regard, and that could involve computer and practical effects, but it is tough. It is that's probably maybe the most unknown factor of the movie. We can speculate and theorize about all these other things, but that's a significant character. And the Lynch miniseries, they all have different versions and ideas that went into them. I think what I lean towards, just my gut feeling, is that it is going to be more so just an actor performing and going off of the direction and the writing, which can be particularly creepy for Alia. And then I do think Simon, I think she is going to be slightly older, is my gut thinking. I don't think it's going to be that much older. I'm thinking, like you said, maybe 5 would be like the maximum. Definitely not an actor. We've seen plenty of kid actors before in like scary movies, horror movies that are 7, 8, 9. But I think that sweet spot of like 4 or 5 years old would be appropriate. And I think you could still get a performance that's convincing for the more minor role that the character has in the actual, Dune Part 2. So yeah, just a big question mark. I mean, it is interesting, Marcus. I am curious to hear, your thoughts as well, because I'm sure you have more Dune knowledge than I do, especially when it comes to the miniseries and the Lynch film. And so just kind of seeing how things maybe went right or wrong previously, what Villeneuve's thoughts are going to be on that and the pitfalls to avoid potentially.
I just want to echo you're saying, Johnny. She's definitely in the movie. I have no doubt that they're going to represent her, especially knowing that in Dune Messiah it's such a critical character. So you have to have that connection. I do think one of the complex topics is how much is she going to be in a movie? Maybe if they feel okay, we can make her convincing in certain scenes, but in other scenes that it would be harder to be convincing. Maybe they'll keep her role more limited. That could keep one aspect to it. But yeah, I was just looking at the other day. Of course, I watched the '84 movie quite a while ago, and I think at the age when I watched it, I didn't think much of it. But when you go back and look at it, you think, okay, the Alia there is definitely weird in some ways. So yeah, I do want them to make it realistic. I know that there have been a couple of child actors that have been connected to the movie. I don't know what's been cleared, so I'm not sure if we'll mention that at this time. But yeah, look, could be that indeed they're just going to go with a child actor and use some convincing effects, like the way that they've had the adults use the voice, as in the Bene Gesserit skills in the movie, has been really convincing from the beginning. I think they've done a really good job there. So I trust that they could, really take the voice and either make it sound older or freaky or whatever direction they think that will make it convincing. But I think for me the main concern is the timelines, right? Because you have to play this child that looks 2 to 3 years old, but potentially with an older child actor. Are you gonna digitally alter that, or with some makeup work like that, or are you just going to avoid the question entirely? And we know that in the book how much time has passed, right? But maybe in the movie they'll just gloss it over and just that several years have passed, but then they won't detail that, and then that could sort of get rid of the issue entirely.
Major spoiler for the end of the first book. She does get rid of a major villain in the book, and she's the downfall of that villain, without naming names. But it's so important that she's in it. yeah, she's in the movie, but how much? And I don't want her just to show up at the very end and take care of that villain. Like, she needs to introduce herself a little bit before. She doesn't need to be in the movie that much, but just as long as we know who she is, what her backstory is, and then if we do get Messiah, great, then we can talk more about her in that movie.
And to Marcus's point, if both of you talking about how much is she going to be in the movie, I would say, yeah, something they could do to, you know, have less issues or things to worry about maybe is to just limit the role somewhat compared to the book. I mean, she's not in the book that much, from what I remember at least. And like lines of dialogue, like can't point to anything like particular that comes to mind other than the scenes you're talking about at the end, Simon. And so I definitely think they're going to retain that ending. I think that makes sense. Or at least something very similar. And then, you know, we know that Irulan is going to have an expanded role. We know that Chani is probably going to have somewhat of a beefed up role compared to the novel. So, you know, doing some expansion with some other more significant older characters and actors makes sense. And then maybe to what balance that, you limit, Alia somewhat. So, yeah, that's definitely something that they could do. And there's a number of ways, like I said, they could go about that. But yeah, I don't, and we know, I mean, Villeneuve dealt with de-aging technology and face swapping technology on Blade Runner 2049, and that's still some of his most praised VFX and some of the most praised use of that technology as well. Certainly better than anything Star Wars has done with it. But again, that's a scene in particular though that is very minimal, and there's not like any dialogue or much dialogue to it. So the technology's come a ways in the last 5 years, but again, how do you balance that and make sure it comes off like it should? And again, I mean, to their benefit, it is supposed to be, and even in 2049, they had the benefit of it's supposed to be uncanny, and it's supposed to be disturbing or unsettling to some degree. That, you could play with that element to it and have it be valid, if that makes sense. So just, again, this movie's going to be a lot weirder, I think, than the first one. And that's going to be one of the most weird aspects of it, probably, or characters, period.
Yeah, I think for me, as long as they find a way to handle it that doesn't like go at all in the comedic direction, because I think that would be the wrong tone. Like, I think that the scene that you mentioned, Simon, like where she gets rid of that villain, and even just before that, where she's being like captured, but and they think, oh, this is just a child, and like the like, I'm thinking of the miniseries. Like the miniseries, the problem there was, like, because of the low budget, the costumes and like some of the acting was not that great, but like at least in terms of the tone, like you're basically this 2-year-old, 3-year-old child is standing in front of you and like has like much more power than you. Like if they can like get that right feeling, the tone for that scene, I think it will work well.
And to that point too, Marcus, I know, going back to the Baron comparison, Baron could have gone really sideways, and part, you said comedy or nailing the tone. One of their concerns when they were weighing CG versus prosthetics in a fat suit was, and Donald Mowat even said this specifically, and what he warned Villeneuve about Denis was that it can very easily come off as comedic or like humorous in some ways, and historically, especially in recent cinema and some famous franchises and characters, you can think of Austin Powers, you can think of The Nutty Professor. It's played for comedy usually with those weight suits and the way that they design those characters. So how do you make sure that it's not going into this kind of strange, almost parody of itself? And they nailed it with the Baron. Baron still looks great from what we saw of the very short glimpses in part 2 so far. And again, it's obviously not going to be the same exact scenario for Alia, but I trust them, and they've already proven that they can very finely walk a line, and that just makes me feel like, as fun as it is to speculate, like I don't even really worry about it or like think that much about it, because I just know when we see it or hear it, whatever it's going to be, I'll just be like, oh, like obviously, like that's how they were going to do it, or that's what it looks like, it works well, or whatever. But yeah, again, that's just one. I'm sure we'll be talking about that literally up until the moment that we see and hear the character, and then also up until we see the movie and see how it works, in context. So, but I know Dune fans and book fans are really going to be itching to know and see more.
I mean, the voice is something so simple that you can fix in both.
It's not a big problem. If she's in the movie for 5 minutes, I'll be a happy camper, because she doesn't need to be in the movie more than 5 minutes.
Yeah, so definitely an intriguing topic, and as Johnny said, I'm sure we'll be revisiting this before the movie comes up. But yeah, what do you guys think? Like, how would you like to see Alia handled in the movie? How much do you think she'll be in it? Let us know in the comments, and yeah, maybe we'll take some follow-up questions on a future episode.
Thanks again, everyone, for watching and supporting. It's been a fun couple of weeks with these videos and getting the gang back together to cover everything and discuss with everyone. So really appreciate that. Johnny Sobchak once again. And you can find me on Twitter at Johnny Sobchak, Letterboxd, Instagram, all that good stuff.
It's Simon Dowdy here. Like Johnny said, it's been a fun couple of weeks. It's fun to be back. S Dowdy pretty much on all the socials. Excited 3 weeks in a row that we've been putting out a show. Hopefully we can keep going. Legendary Warner Brothers, hook us up with some news.
Yeah, this is Marcus Gabriel, editor at DuneNewsNet.com. You can find me writing there, and yeah, you'll continue to see some features as the news comes up. So certainly we're going to have a summer of Dune coming up, so a lot to look forward. And yeah, thanks everybody for the comments, feedbacks, questions. Keep it coming, and we will be doing more of these shows occasionally where we just take a step back and answer some of the big questions that have come up often. So feel free to send them our way either on YouTube or on our socials at Dune News.
We hope you've enjoyed Dune Talk. Remember to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you know when the next episode drops. Stay tuned to DuneNewsNet.com and add us to your social feeds. Be the first to hear breaking news and reviews.